Gen Z and Millennials. What's something you wish the older generations understood? Silent Samis said. I'm in my mid-60s. Those of us who don't have our heads in the sand can sympathize. I worked 3 jobs in college in a rigorous field of study and was exhausted for the entire 4 years. I wish I had gone to a community college for my prerequisites, but back then many credits wouldn't transfer. Your generation has a tough row to hoe. Maybe trade school could be the way. Hugs, dear. The solution to your dilemma is way above my pay grade. Watch the Boom said. Just because I know how to find the answer to something doesn't mean I think I'm smarter than you. I'm just trying to save both of us from wasting time. Eli Font said that the cost of education far outpaced inflation and wage growth in the U.S. If I had a dime for each boomer who lectured me about working my way through school like they did, I might almost be able to buy a house. Idithom said. The colleges saw that they were guaranteed the money and the banks know they were guaranteed 90% of the money even if the student defaulted right as they graduated, so of course both loved it. The college figured out very quickly what the typical financial aid package was, so they raised tuition by that amount because they know you'll pay it for that piece of paper, which thanks to degree inflation is required for jobs that have no business asking for it. Manelcat 123 said. How old the oldest millennials actually are. Millennials cannot afford houses doesn't sound like a big deal if you only see millennials as people in their 20s, but the problem is that the oldest millennials are approaching 40 and they still can't afford a house. Kantbatubad 1953 said. We are already there. Buying a home was a way to build equity and ride the escalator toward a better home, larger home, newer home. Ironically, those conditions require that the first home might be something of a dive, the kind nobody wants to stay in. Seems nowadays even those starters are impossibly expensive. The only solution I have found involves moving farther away from family and friends to a place no one really wants to live, only to be able to afford the price. Salam 83 said. I was in the automotive industry in 08 with a subcontractor Chisab. I was only 5 years out of uni. That recession wiped me out. Fast forward through the slow process of clearing debt and restoring credit. I was in the live event industry at the start of the pandemic. We're still not back and I'm pretty much wiped again. House? I rent a room. My first house will be inherited from my parents, no doubt. Rusty L. Shackelford said. I fixed this when my parents started doing this. I was working a night shift job and got off at like 6 a.m. and they would call me to chat and then give me shit for sleeping till dinner. The argument of, I don't just come home and immediately crash her most days. I got shit to do after working everyone else, and B, do you walk up, get ready and go to work, or do you wake up 7 hours early just for the hell of it? It finally stopped when I started calling them on my lunch break in the wee hours of the morning. Oh, it's 3 a.m.? LOL, why are you still sleeping? I've already been at work for 7 hours. Get up, you're wasting the day. Coffee Mug said. Definitely boomer. I'm in my 20s, living with my boomer parents. My shift starts at 4 a.m. every morning. It's caused a rocky rift in my family because I have to be in bed by 6:30 p.m. every night or else I won't get enough sleep for work the next day. They don't understand why I need to go to bed early for an early morning shift, even after many days where I've woke up and walked out the door for a shift and they are still awake from the day before. Sir Daniel Fortesque said that we're not that lazy and we have a good reason to be depressed, cynical, and pessimistic. People like my grandma always talk how at your age I was married, had a house, and 2 kids, blah blah, not realizing they did all that on one paycheck, while simultaneously complaining how money isn't worth anything nowadays and they just went grocery shopping and spent 25% of their income while chanting don't worry, it's gonna get better. How the fuck can you not put those two together? Hit 'em with .K Train said. Millennials are grown-ass adults. Literally the youngest conceivable cut point for millennials, ability to candidly remember pre-9/11 at least for us in my opinion, is in the latter half of their mid-20s. The oldest possible cut point is in their early 40s. Millennials didn't kill industries. Complacency and a lack of forethought killed them. Taxi monopolies had a decade or more to make an app or whatever that was transparent about pricing, routes, and at least vastly more secure for riders than an anonymous pickup. We didn't kill Applebee's. The world is just more accessible now, and I'd rather eat something more interesting than frozen in microwave dishes I can make at least as well at home for 10% of the cost. Industries committed suicide because they thought being the best when we were 6 was going to be good enough. You gave us the fucking participation trophies, although I agree they're dumb. You were the snowflakes who couldn't let your precious little angel grapple with the fact that he won't be one of the like 500 NBA players one day. It is wholly unnecessary to spend 10 minutes giving me directions somewhere. Prolixotic said. I feel this one. I like reading and writing and therefore spend a lot of time on my laptop. Not to mention reading news articles and Wikipedia pages about interesting topics. Of course I could read a physical book, or write with a notebook and pen, but on my laptop my spelling grammar is checked immediately and I can look up facts, references, definitions with ease. I realize the concern comes from the idea of not being active, but if you aren't a total shut-in, it should be fine. It's not like I don't enjoy sports or go out at all, lol. Zoe said. It doesn't matter how much I work. I busted my ass for my old boss for years, and when I decided to leave he tried to tell me a story about how when he was my age he worked as much as I did and bought an apartment complex as a side hustle. I replied I would love to do that, and asked for a raise, to which he declined. Older generations love to spout how new generations hate to work. We don't hate to work, but we want to actually enjoy our fucking money. Raydur Smile said. The biggest problem is that the world we live in now is so far from the boomers' lived experience that they simply cannot accept it or choose not to believe it. Stop whining, they say, and do what I did, suck it up and pay for college with a part-time job at McDonald's. And the thing is, they're not wrong. You can look up the academic institution of your choice. I like to use UCLA because my reactionary father-in-law lives in Los Angeles. Just Google 1965 minimum wage, 1965 UCLA tuition, 1965 Los Angeles room for rent etc. and you can easily find the historical data. In 1965, you could comfortably attend the University of California, Los Angeles on a part-time job at McDonald's. That's the scenario they are imagining when they call the younger generations lazy, a bunch of entitled brats who aren't willing to work a part-time job. Edit. For the sake of clarity, in 2021, a part-time job at McDonald's won't even cover the in-state tuition at UCLA, meaning you're already in the hole before you've even put a roof over your head or food in your belly. Meanwhile, a single part-time job doesn't even really count as work to Zoomers and younger millennials, who are accustomed to working extremely long hours, often split between multiple employers, who do this to avoid having to provide healthcare benefits and a retirement plan. The highest achieving and lowest compensated generation in the history of the United States doesn't need a work ethic. They have a survival ethic that already pushes them to go far, far harder than what the boomers are talking about when they talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Drakmanka said. My late great aunt had an interesting take on this. She knew from experience that her house and the surrounding roads confused the shit out of anyone trying to follow a GPS because of how it was all laid out. So, when I asked her for her address to visit her one day, she said, okay, let me tell you the actual how to get here first because it's weird. Then I'll give you the address for your GPS. It was a good thing too, because I would have missed 3 turns and would have had to cycle back around otherwise. A 94-year-old figured this out. She also had an iPad and used it like a pro. Come on people, you're never too old to embrace technology. Fetu Senub said. You can hate your fucking job and be sad just because you think of the future. Once had a small talk with my parents. My job is draining and I can't see how it can get me to anywhere. My mental health deteriorated since university. Become a little bit negative and stop joking around like a clown during the conversation. Their reply? I don't understand why you can hate your job so much unless you are slacking. Why would you choose to be sad instead of being happy? Thanks mom, really helpful. Concerned Pineapple said. That you can't just walk outside and get jobs stuck in your hair or on the soles of your shoes anymore. Also that minimum wage jobs will in no way allow you to earn enough money to get on the property ladder. If you do manage to land a job, you have to jump through a billion hoops such as uploading a CV as well as filling in a form asking for the exact same information that's included in your CV, group assessments and all of that carry on. It's not enough to just hand a CV over anymore and get an interview. Even if you know how to game the system, getting a job is bloody difficult. Maybe back in the 60s you could afford to support a family with a full-time job flipping burgers, but not anymore. Edit. I used blue collar instead of minimum wage. No idea why. I know better than that. Apologies. Plantain said, "You can't put yourself through college by working at the supermarket anymore. Our generation is the biggest in US history, so competition for jobs is much harder than it was for boomers, which causes wages to flatline. Add to this that housing and food costs are at all-time highs and it's pretty bleak for us. Even many of those who have good jobs at Fortune 500 companies cannot afford to purchase homes. I would really just like boomers for once just to acknowledge how difficult it is today versus when they were coming up. It's a different world and they just can't see it. It's very frustrating because most of them still think that anybody willing to swing a hammer 40 hours a week can make a living in America, and it's just not true anymore." Feet Smell said, "I have a boomer housemate that is so out of touch with how the world actually works these days. She will preach about how certain systems work, like education, finance and even property, because she apparently used to own a few. The problem is none of the info is relevant anymore, and she refuses to see that things are wildly different now even as they happen to her. We're in the middle of being evicted due to our landlord selling, and she just has no idea about how dehumanizing and difficult these things are. She's learning the hard way that things don't just magically work out. Anytime there is a new hurdle, she just throws a tantrum and expects someone else to do it or for it to magically go away." Gerdatero said, "Just general cost of living, especially for young families. I was at a baby shower yesterday and the mom mentioned that daycare she looked into near work was $3,000 a month. That's for an infant, so I know that's always more expensive, but, man, that means most of my paycheck would be going there. On top of that, it was a hustle to get where I am, graduating into the recession, and it's just now really paying off, literally and figuratively. I need to save for retirement, so it's not like I can just stay home. Plus, what if there is a downturn, and my husband loses his job? His parents were totally fucked by the recession. Plus call is so high. Homes, cars, food, phones, everything costs more. Our whole goal is having a mortgage we can pay off stocking shelves at Trader Joe's if we have to. So, yeah, I think if I become a mom, I'll be solidly in my late 30s. Not ideal, but that's just how it's working out. Wish they talk more about this shit when reporting on falling fertility. Obviously, there are people choosing to forego, which even I debate now, but it's economic. If you are a regular person, working for a living, you pay through the nose." Lynn 1987 said, "With exception to Latin, everything my dad studied as an honor student in the 60s I studied as a non-honors student in the zeros. He also didn't start writing multi-page essays, 7+ pages, until college. I started writing those in 8th grade. School was significantly easier back then because there was no expectation for most of the students. After graduation the majority of the boys joined the service, learned a trade and got a job. The majority of the women got married, had kids, and if they did work, it was something menial that required very little training. That's not the case anymore." Inside Glove 1483 said, "One of the things people don't realize in the age of automation is what people with low intelligence are supposed to do. Reddit is filled with smart people who studied STEM in college, so they are out of the touch of the fact that many people are too dumb to work at McDonald's or Walmart. 15% of the population are considered to be mentally too dumb to do anything in the military that isn't counterproductive. Considering the military is desperate for people, those 15% are literally completely useless in the world. What are they supposed to do? Just live off of government money for the rest of their life? They can't learn the trades either since the trades require high intelligence." Thorn Rosara said, "Middle Gen X here. In high school, we were able to take courses like drafting, shop, taking care of vehicles, simple small engine repair, cooking, business math, considered a soft math, but it taught things like budgeting, finance, interest, how to apply for loans, balancing a checkbook, calculating and filing income taxes, payroll basics, etc., electronics, welding, really, and accounting basics, among other things. The home economics course taught you how to do basic baking, sewing, repairing clothing, learning how to determine the best cuts of meats and vegetables, household management, shopping for the best deals, time management, all the stuff you needed to run a home, basically. There was a Venus CNA course that you took for a half day at the trade school, so that by the time you graduated high school, you already had your CNA certification. By the time my kids were in school, Millennials and Gen Z, all of the life skills classes were gone, and replaced by some of the most ridiculous time wasters I've ever seen. Nope, my daughter couldn't learn how to run a sewing machine to fix her clothes. But look, Mom. Here's an art class that focuses on photography, even though I will never use anything besides my cell phone to do photos, and I'm going to need $150 to pay for my Photoshop software license and supplies. Thorn Rosara said. A lot of those life skills classes that seemed so useless actually gave those 15% individuals options to learn things that they could do throughout their life. It gave my generation some very good cooks who, although they couldn't master a spreadsheet, they could whip up some of the best cakes you ever tasted. It gave us seamstresses who could make and alter wedding dresses. It gave us welders, mechanics, small engine repairmen, appliance repairmen, etc. A lot of the skills I use today in my home and in different areas were originally learned in those classes. With your generation, we unleashed an entire generation of people who had no actual real-life training, outside of what they could glean from two working parents who were tired AF when they got home, pretty much dependent on pre-prepared meals, and barely able to hold things together themselves. And honestly, I consider that a failing both of my generation and the previous generation. Those life skill courses could have made such a difference for a lot of people who are struggling with something as simple as boiling water in a microwave. The life skill classes really need to make a comeback, IMHO. Lily Conley said. I just had a talk with my mom about my brother. He's finishing university and is mostly free now for the summer, and she's very concerned about his life. She wishes he had some interests and things to do. I remind her he's very interested in his study, and he writes now that he has a free time. Then she's concerned that he isn't involved with the world events. I tell her he's subscribed to tons of videos and knows what's happening. He doesn't have to physically go to places where people gather and discuss. He can do it from his room. Then she points out that since some of his friends left for summer, he has no one to socialize with and he should have made more friends. Mom, they talk on Discord all the time and are connected even when they're watching stuff. Retta Lloyd Samongas said. Unless you are extremely gifted and have a way to demonstrate it, social class is becoming more locked in than it has been in generations. The social mobility that started to become available in the first half of the 20th century, but amplified much more so in the 40s, 50s and 60s, started to decline in the 80s, and by the 2010s was a straight-up free fall. If you do not have parents that are willing and able to support your social and financial progress from childhood through higher education, or through training in a steady trade, you are at very real risk of falling through the cracks of this society through no fault of your own. This game isn't about intelligence, effort, hard work, personality, or anything else. If you didn't start ahead and work to remain ahead without ceasing, you were facing a very hard road ahead. Add a serious illness, an unexpected child, or a few missed paychecks, and people can find themselves destitute with little or no recourse. College is no longer something you can fund with a summer job. Housing isn't something you can save for a few years for and then have a 20% down payment. Retirement isn't something you get after working under a pension plan, but rather an investment that laymen with no training have to try to invest as best they can. Healthcare isn't about seeing your local doctor, but rather about paying a corporatized doctor and hospital network obscene fees that bear no relation to market prices. Food, power, fuel, water, all cost more in real terms than they did when you were growing up. So if you can't bring yourselves to help us, at least don't shit on us for feeling entitled to less than what you had. Zanshim said. That mental health exists and that males don't always have to be consistently strong or be made to bear a lot of struggle for their own good. I have anxiety issues that my parents don't know and don't give a crap about whenever I'm mentally tired, because they gauge my tiredness from my physical state but exempt from checking my mental state, and it doesn't get better than I'm disciplined at higher standard while my sister gets to slack off most of the time without disciplinary action. It doesn't get better that I'm struggling at school and that my mom would rather allocate the tasks to me rather than her free daughter. I do hope things get better or that I get out of this household much sooner if things don't change. Althanan said. You had all the time in the world, you had all the benefits and privileges you could dream of, you had the geopolitical stars aligned to ensure that this country would remain dominant for your entire adult lives, And you opted to do this with it. I always have to remind myself that this is capitalism's fault, and not a strictly generational thing. I have to keep reminding myself of that because holy fucking Christ is it easy to forget. When I look at the state of the world and see just how totally, utterly fucked we are and that these circumstances were thrust upon us without our consent or input, and indeed designed to prevent our input, just so you could buy a house in the villages and lose it canasta every Thursday. That's what you sold us out for. I know it isn't all of you. I know folks in their 80s that fought like hell to keep this from happening, and those old should be seen as honored elders. But to those of you who really fit the mold of the boomer, if I could make you understand just one thing, it would be how deeply you deserve the loathing with what younger generations look at you with.